Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and you join me here in Fallout New Vegas in a random parking lot, but although there is actually more to this place than meets the eye. So, continuing on the Psychology of the Vault series, where we're taking a look at what the experiments in the vaults actually did and what that can tell us about human nature and about psychology. So, we're actually going into Vault 19, so that one is near the Samson rock crushing plant, so just to the kind of southwest of Vegas itself, quite near Bonnie Springs and things, and it is hidden under here. There we go, so now we are right in the entrance to the vault. Presumably that means that they had all the residents just come in through that sewer grate, which is an interesting choice, but never mind, that's where we are. And oh look, there's cameras. So if you don't know Vault 19, the experiment that was carried out here, Vault 19 was manufactured to create paranoia in its residents. So the experiment was to assess what happens in such a circumstance and evaluate how people behave. So we do need to talk about a few sort of specific definitions first of all, to understand what was going on here. And you can see there's quite an abundance of security cameras in this vault which are active, and that's not something that you normally see in the vault. So psychosis is a mental health condition that essentially where the person has a breakdown in their ability to understand what's real and what's not. They can't distinguish what's real versus what isn't real anymore, and that can be very distressing. Understandably, for people it could be very distressing because they are experiencing things like delusions and hallucinations, and it's scary not just for the person themselves but also for the people around them, so their family, their partner, their children, loved ones. It can be very, very scary to experience for people. And schizophrenia is a term that's often misused and misunderstood, but essentially it is someone that is seeing and hearing things that don't exist, namely hallucinations. They might speak in a strange way. They might believe that others are trying to harm them or that they're being watched. But fun fact about schizophrenia is that there's not a single person who was born blind. So this is where it was congenital blindness. So they were born blind, and instead of someone that, could see when they were born, but then they lost their ability to see after something happened, that kind of thing. That's the difference. So congenital blindness, which means it was there at the time of birth. And they've basically never developed schizophrenia. So anyone that was born blind from the beginning of their life has never been diagnosed with schizophrenia, which is an interesting thing. The good news is that for 25% of people that experience an episode like that, they make a full recovery and never have any issues again for the rest of their lives, which is great. But some people that do suffer from these illnesses do need kind of ongoing care and management in order to survive. So the good news is that there's a number of options for treatment for these conditions, which does include medication as well as other kinds of psychiatric therapies. And the symptoms are split into a few different categories. So we have positive, which is active symptoms, and negative, which is inactive symptoms. So absence of normal thoughts or emotions, that kind of thing. And as per the DSM-5, which is the standard for diagnosis and treatment of psychiatric disorders in the US. 2 or more of the symptoms that we're going to discuss must be present for a significant portion of time in like a month. So it's not something, it's something that has been kind of persistent for a period of time. Yeah, we've got a bunch of journal entries and terminals. There's supposed to be a clinic terminal somewhere, and I cannot for the life of me remember where it is. There is a lot of kind of diary entries and things, so you can certainly read into that and see what a lot of people experienced. I have the key, so I've already completed the quest that's in this place. We're split into 2 sectors. There's the red sector and the blue sector. That's why there's 2 overseers' offices. That's why there's 2 separate things with keys, so that people were split into one side and the other side. That's essentially what happened in this vault. So delusions are things where there's a strong belief in something that isn't real, despite clear evidence that their belief is wrong. So, for example, a belief that they're being persecuted, that other people are out to get them, or belief that their thoughts or actions are being controlled by someone else, or something is holding a special personal meaning, like a person on TV sending that individual person a secret message just for them. And you get things like delusions of grandeur as well, which is beliefs that someone is actually an important figure, like Jesus, say, or that they have unusual powers that nobody else has, like being invisible. This person's got a lot of... yeah, this is some of the stuff about the clinic as well, so trying to hack into the doctor's computer. And looking at the patient files that they were all in code and things like that. So as somebody that's getting paranoid that the vault doctor's doing something. So these are exactly the kinds of things, and then they're obviously out looking for evidence of what they think is going on, so that they can catch them in the act, that kind of thing. It's very, very interesting in this vault. There are fire geckos and stuff in this place though, so do be aware of that. But there's sulfur caves underneath this vault, which is kind of part of the problem. Yeah, there we go. So this is another kind of indication of that they're hearing voices through the vents. They sound like they're plotting, they sound like hate. The blues never sit with us, they treat us as if we have a disease. Maybe we do, this whole vault is sick. So people are hearing things and they're seeing things, and they're making a lot of assumptions about what might be going on, and that was kind of the goal of this vault in a sense, you know. That was kind of the idea was, you know, they separated them into these 2 separate factions to pit them against each other to see what would happen. So one of the other things is hallucinations. So that is sounds or sights that are real to the sufferer, but they don't exist outside that person's mind. They're not really happening. So hearing voices is a common one, but sometimes it is seeing things, catching things in the corner of your eye. You can even have olfactory hallucinations, which is where you think you're smelling something but you're not, like smelling smoke when there's no fire or anything like that. That's definitely a thing. And if someone is calmer and they're kind of generally feeling okay and relatively stable, they can manage and ignore the voices that they're hearing. But if they're having a severe situation and they're not feeling settled, then the voices can take over and become controlling to that person. You'll often see things like disorganized speech. So kind of having trouble concentrating in a conversation and veering off topic very easily, or saying things that are illogical or incoherent, making loose associations, making up words, and repetition are quite characteristic of that. I mean, you do have to be careful what you ascribe to something like schizophrenia versus, other differences in the way people behave, like neurodivergence, for example, that kind of thing. So you do have to be a wee bit careful about what take it with a pinch of salt and look at everything. Because I know that and you've probably noticed this, I can sometimes quite easily get off topic and things, but it's usually connected to what I'm talking about. But other kind of behaviours that you might see include chaotic behaviour, so acting unpredictable, reacting bizarrely, so inappropriate reactions to things like, sort of laughing when someone tells you something that's really sad or really awful, stuff like that. You can sometimes see kind of a loss of inhibition, so that thing that holds you back from, stripping off naked and running down in a crowded street. So losing that inhibition that controls behaviour so that things are socially acceptable, impulsivity, extreme mood swings. And a lot of sufferers, again, this is quite common with a lot of mental health disorders, they stop taking care of themselves, so they stop taking care of their hygiene, they withdraw from social interactions, they avoid people, they self-isolate and that kind of thing. And then the negative symptoms are where there's an absence of what's called normal functioning, so these ones tend to persist longer, so lack of emotional expression, speaking in a flat, monotone voice, they don't smile or make eye contact. They might show a lack of interest in things like hobbies, day-to-day life, as well as the social withdrawal. And again, you do have to be careful because there is crossover with, sort of neurodivergence and things like that. But that's the kind of symptoms that would suggest that we are looking at this kind of issue. Schizophrenia definitely does have a genetic factor, and they have confirmed that with studies on, identical twins and things, that if one twin develops it, then it's very highly likely that the other twin can be vulnerable to it as well. So it does seem to have a genetic component to it, which makes sense. But stress is often thought to be a significant trigger factor for the development of the disorder, perhaps due to things like high cortisol levels. So cortisol is the stress hormone. It's persistently high if someone is going through a lot of stress. So it could be, any number of things. It could be another illness that's going on. It could be some financial problems, losing your job, that kind of thing, bereavement, all these kinds of things. And even sort of viral infections, which could potentially happen before birth, or shortly after, parental loss, other traumatic events, that kind of thing. There's all kind of number of things, and even in some cases it can be put down to someone using illicit substances, essentially, has been known to trigger schizophrenia in people. Again, that's potentially putting the body under a lot of stress. Let's see, why is the door to the quarters disappeared? This bolt's making me paranoid because I can't find what I'm looking for. But mental health conditions aren't just about like somebody's mood and behaviour. There can be detectable abnormalities in the nervous system. So with schizophrenia and these kinds of things, you can see enlarged ventricles, in the brain. So if they do an MRI scan, so the ventricles are little, there's a whole kind of circulatory system of cerebrospinal fluid surrounding the brain, and there's little kind of pockets within the brain where that fluid sits, and they're called ventricles. So if they're enlarged, changes in the temporal lobe, changes in the hippocampus or the amygdala. So the hippocampus is involved in memory, and it's responsible for putting short-term memories into long-term memory. The amygdala plays a huge role in mood and behavioural regulation. There's research showing that changes in neurotransmitters, important neurotransmitters like dopamine, like serotonin and GABA, play a role. So serotonin is your mood regulating neurotransmitter. Dopamine is the reward neurotransmitter. So when you eat a food that you really like and it's nice and it makes you happy to eat something you really like, that's dopamine. That's what creates that feeling of that you've done something that you like and it's making you happy. That's what dopamine does. And altered levels of these neurotransmitters are characteristic of many mental health disorders, including things like anxiety and depression, although the jury's still out in most of these whether the altered levels of neurotransmitters are the cause of the mental disorder or if they are a result of having the mental disorder. Nobody's quite agreed on that just yet. I don't know if you guys will pick that up in the recording because it's very faint, but I did just hear what sounded like voices or a little bit of music or something. That was okay, and that's not me joking around either, by the way. That actually did just happen. I'll see if I can isolate the sound when I'm editing, but let's see. I've been reading the bulletin boards for months now. There's a spy, one of the reds pretending to be a blue. They're using the bulletin boards to communicate. And then the lights flickering and they think it's Morse code or Morse code. I don't know whether that was a typo or the person didn't know how to spell it. But yeah, so medication can certainly improve the symptoms of that sound again, can improve the symptoms of these things, but as I said, certain illicit substances like cannabis, cocaine and LSD, amphetamines can trigger schizophrenia as well, so it is a known potential consequence of using those substances, which obviously I cannot in good conscience recommend. It's not a good idea, don't recommend it. Also, generally speaking, against the law in most places. So we're not condoning that in this house. But obviously, Vault 19, the experiment was to induce paranoia without using chemicals or violence, because you can do that, obviously creating some kind of trauma, or using, as I said, certain substances that can trigger it. So they wanted to find other ways of doing it. So they split the vault into the two sectors. You've got the red sector and the blue sector. Each side had their own overseer. They had some limited interactions with each other. So you see, as you saw walking around, the cafeteria is connected to both sides. And you have a key. So they had limited interactions with each other, and subliminal messaging may have been used. There's no real evidence of subliminal messaging actually working in real life, but certainly in this game, you know, when people are thinking, oh no, somebody's leaving notes on the bulletin board, and if you read all the, I'm not going to go through all the kind of diary entries of the residents. I did do that when I covered this vault for the Vault Tech series. But yeah, you can really see the way people were being affected, and they were worrying about things like one of the residents found a Sunset Sarsaparilla Star bottle cap, and you can read two different entries. One where not in the vents, I think. Getting headaches. Yeah. But yeah, there's one of the residents finds the Sunset Sarsaparilla Star bottle cap and thinks it's some form of mind control. Another resident saw him take it to his room and plots to steal it, thinking that he's been chosen for something. This one here is mentioning changes in the air vents. They couldn't sleep early in the morning and they noticed a change in the sound of the vent for about 5 minutes and they didn't think much of it but couldn't get back to sleep again, and it happened at the same time that night. And then they've been getting headaches and this keeps happening at the same time, and they noticed something and they reported it to maintenance. They were told that everything was perfect and not to worry about it, and he's like, no, I don't believe him, maybe he's in on it. Yeah, so there's a lot of that kind of thing, and especially when people are like, something weird's happening, and they go and report it, and it's like, no, it's fine, don't worry about it, and they're just getting gaslit about it. Essentially, that's the situation here. And there is someone else that notes that they think that they're being poisoned through the air vents because there's a weird smell coming from the air vents. But remember, this vault is located within some sulfur caves, so that could explain, and sulfur does have a distinctive smell, that rotten egg smell that I think everybody's probably very familiar with. It's sulfur and sulfur related compounds that cause that smell, so it's quite distinctive. You know, but people are having trouble sleeping, seeing strange lights, worries. So there was a note from the overseer about the water purification system, and then people are accusing the other side of sabotaging it, when it's probably just Vault-Tec and those pesky water chips that fail 30% of the time. And then someone broke into the clinic to read the terminals because they didn't trust the doctor. They started questioning their own sanity. They think the doctor is drugging them, and they found a bunch of sedatives and restraints and things. Yeah, here's somebody that thinks that they're broadcasting into their brains. And yeah, there's the Blue Star bottle cap. It's just making them see things, and every time he thinks it's going to go away if he closes his eyes, and it's not, and he's getting very, very distressed about the whole situation. So, and this was kind of on purpose. We know that Vault-Tec manufactured this, essentially. That's what they wanted. They wanted people to be thinking that way and feeling that way here. Yeah. Oh yeah, here's the other person that saw the bottle cap and he wants it because it's like, I want to know what's so special about it. It's, yeah. So it's all these people that are seeing things and misinterpreting things and getting quite distressed about the whole situation. The patient logs are very interesting, and I need to figure out where the actual terminal is, so bear with me. Okay, I figured out why I can't find the patient logs. They're not on a terminal, they're on holotapes.
Didn't think you'd make it back. Don't want to argue for...
That's Christine. Here we go, found them. Okay, so yeah, the patient logs are very interesting. So you can find them on holotapes on the floor of the clinic. That's why I couldn't see them, because I've already been through this vault. But yeah, we've got someone coming in claiming to be hearing voices, and hearing voices coming from his grandfather's radio, and he thinks that they're coming from himself now. Someone claiming to be insane, getting feeling of being outside himself, which is termed dissociation. But it was affecting his balance and things, so it could be that he actually had something going on, like a middle ear infection that was causing a loss of balance, and that was making him feel like he was dissociated. We've got someone having panic attacks. Yeah, no real details on this one. And then misinterpreting other people's actions as hostile, so even people that are friendly, he's assuming that they're patronising. And he is kind of inducing aggression on other people because of his sort of hostility. So as the residents of this vault get more and more paranoid, they're creating more paranoia in each other and they're impacting each other. So it's creating stress, and that's something that, you know, can trigger these kinds of things. So what Vault 19 shows us here is that it is actually quite possible to induce this kind of paranoia in people potentially quite easily. And find our way back to the overseer's office, the other overseer's office on the blue side. This terminal here, so yeah. So there is mention of fake medical records induced through non-violent and non-chemical means. And then stuff about the reactor. Yeah, so we are missing quite a bit of information about exactly what the experiment was, but clearly it was a case of we want to induce this level of psychosis in these people without using drugs, without, you know, causing trauma from threatening them or attacking them or anything like that, and just using other means to kind of trigger that. And it does seem to be effective. Now, I'm not entirely sure if Vault-Tec specifically selected residents that were maybe deemed to have a higher tendency to develop these problems. Obviously, that's the kind of thing that could skew your results, because if you're not just picking a random selection of the population, if you're deliberately choosing people that are more likely to develop these kinds of conditions, then you're kind of cherry picking the results to get the result that you want, and that's not a good scientific method. But Vault-Tec doesn't always seem to care about that stuff, so, you know. But clearly the overseers were doing these things on purpose, you know, creating the noises, creating the lights, and inducing that, blaming, oh no, it's the Reds that are trying to sabotage us, oh no, the Blues are trying to, you know, sending spies to spy on us, that kind of thing. And it's an us versus them, which again can trigger this. And even just things like the cameras, I mean, you know, the cameras are everywhere and they're moving constantly, and that's one of the things, is that obviously that feeling that you're being watched all the time is going to make you feel more paranoid. And, you know, it's amazing what these things can do in terms of having a psychological impact on people. And when you come to this vault first, it's basically a bunch of powder gangers that are here. Samuel Cook and a group of the escaped convicts, powder gangers that are staying in this vault. But when they found it, the place had been abandoned, so clearly everything must have fallen apart. You don't even really find any skeletons or anything in here. So we don't really know what happened to the people. I'm guessing at one point somebody maybe decided to open the vault and they all just left. We don't really know what the outcome was in terms of what happened to the people. They don't seem to have died here in any significant number, because I would expect to find skeletons and stuff. But when the powder gangers got here, it was empty, and so either everyone died and got eaten by the geckos, or they left for an unknown fate in the wasteland. But it's clear that, you know, making people paranoid like this and deliberately triggering psychosis in people, it does not make for a functional society in that sense. And of course, the irony, and that's why the quest is called Why Can't We Be Friends? Because the powder gangers that have moved in here have split into two sides and two factions, and they disagree on how to handle the sulfur caves and the geckos underneath. And you need to kind of pick a side essentially for that. And these kinds of things, paranoia and like conspiracy beliefs, like the two residents that were freaking out about the blue star bottle caps, and they're very prevalent today. Everything from people saying that the moon landing's a hoax to there was a whole one story about Paul McCartney of the Beatles dying in 1966 and being replaced with a lookalike. And then John Lennon started adding sneaky hints into the album cover designs and then inside the songs, using backward masking to drop hints that Paul McCartney was dead. That was one that I kind of stumbled across by accident many years ago now, and it sent me in a rabbit hole. That way when you go onto Wikipedia to look something up and then 2 hours later you're reading about something completely unrelated and you've just been sitting there and you go down one of those rabbit holes. That's kind of what happened to me with this conspiracy theory about the Beatles. And people have really dug deep into analysing like the Abbey Road album cover and everything for proof that John Lennon was just like he's actually dead. As bonkers, but it's there's a lot of these things, and the moon landing being a hoax as well. That's one of the most famous ones, and there are more significant and topical ones, but this isn't really the venue for that. I do like to kind of keep a lot of that stuff off this part of the internet, because we're just here to talk about games and science and have fun. But it's interesting to see how these kinds of things can develop, and psychosis might have a genetic or physiological factor that makes a person more likely to develop that disorder, but environmental factors definitely play a role as well. Mental health issues did rise significantly during the pandemic for a number of reasons, but it was collectively a stressful time for the whole world, essentially, that we were having to deal with changes in how our day-to-day operated. Everybody's routine changed. With the lockdown orders and things, people were quite isolated from others. People were scared for their health. There was a whole load of things. People had family members and friends getting sick and people were dying. So it was one of these kind of situations that the whole world was kind of in the same boat. And at the time, I was living alone. It was just me and the cat, and I basically was sole charge at the vet practice Monday to Thursday. So it was just me, a nurse and a receptionist, or sometimes 2 nurses if I got lucky. And without that, I would have had very limited social interactions other than online or on the phone. I didn't really visit my family at all because they were helping look after my grandmother who's in her 90s, and because I was still face-to-face interacting with the public at times, I couldn't risk passing anything on. It's only since then that I've become immunocompromised, so I would be at serious risk if something like that happened again, because of the medication that I'm taking. And it was very stressful for me, and that was nothing compared to what the human healthcare workers were dealing with, and it did have a massive impact. There was a lot more kind of mental health problems developed because of that, and it's understandable because, I say, when your body's in stress mode all the time, it does take its toll on every part of your system, from your hormones to neurotransmitters in your brain. It's all very, very complex, and situations that develop, it's exactly the same with PTSD. So whether it's sort of PTSD, which usually comes from one singular traumatic event, or complex PTSD, where it tends to be more sustained trauma that leads to the problems that come with that. And it is, I mean, people say, well, it's all in your head. That doesn't mean it's not real, because psychological disorders absolutely can physically affect the brain. It physically affects the neurotransmitters, the way the brain functions. It can have detectable physical effects and physiological effects. So it is one of these things, and especially when trauma happens very early in life, it can, but it can also happen in adults as well, even once you're over 25 and your frontal lobe's fully developed. I'm not sure exactly what Vault-Tec wanted to get from this, but they certainly got some results as far as we can see, because people were really quite distressed and they were believing some of these delusions. People were hallucinating. All these kind of symptoms were showing up in the residents of Vault 19. And the likelihood is that either the geckos broke through and ate everybody, or the community must have fallen apart, and we just don't really know exactly what happened to the residents. But then a bunch of powder gangers came along and split into factions, and the same thing happened there. So it's and just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean that they're not out to get you. That's kind of the thing, and we know that it was all done on purpose. The cameras are really creepy. It makes me think of GLaDOS, actually, without the snarky insults, but here we are. So that's Vault 19 and the demonstration of how easy it can be to actually induce paranoia in people. Definitely not something that I would recommend doing, because it can cause an awful lot of harm, but it's clear that even though there is genetic factors, environment and certain circumstances do play a role in the development of these disorders as well, and Vault-Tec definitely proved that with this one. So thanks very much for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I'll be back on Tuesday with some more Fallout 4 locations. We're going to venture off into the Glowing Sea for the summer, so I've got a couple of things in mind there. And then next Saturday we're going to be talking about another Vault and another psychology topic, so hopefully you'll come back for that. I hopefully will have the Ulysses video, in-depth video, ready for Thursday. Everything's recorded, I just need to finish editing it all together. I'm really excited about sharing this one. It's taken a lot of work to put it together, but I'm very excited about it, and I hope you guys will be too. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.